Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It is so great to see folks. Folks are still coming in. I want to thank you for being here and welcome you to this conversation on how cash helps workers strike back. Before we get started, let's take a second and introduce who is in the room in the chat. So if you could please share your name, your organization, your pronouns, and your first job. Just take a second, type that into the chat. We can get a sense of who is gathered here today. This is being recorded and live streamed, and today is just one of many of these conversations aimed at exploring how cash helps workers strike back. So again, your name, your organization, your pronouns, and your first job. I'm Natalie Foster. I am co-founder and co-chair of the Economic Security Project, She, Her. And my first job was a Sonic car hop where I would deliver fast food to cars in the parking lot of the Sonic in Hutchinson, Kansas. It is so great to be here with everyone. So thank you as you continue to introduce. I'm going to tee up today's conversation. So in the past 2 years, under the pressures of the pandemic and the economic crisis, we have seen people demand more, demanding more from our government, more from our institutions, and more from our employers. And we are joined here today by leaders across two powerful movements that have actually blossomed under this pressure: an energized movement to organize workers and a movement for a guaranteed income. Now, these movements share a common belief that putting money back into people's pockets is about taking back our ability to write our own stories and to build our own power. And cities across America are indeed writing their own stories. The guaranteed income demonstrations in Stockton, California, and Jackson, Mississippi, launching 4 years ago, have grown to nearly 100 demonstrations across this country. And the last 2 years of policymaking in America have provided another type of demonstration that we as a nation can defy gravity and actually reduce poverty in the midst of a recession and a pandemic, thanks to the cash supports that we demanded from our government. More than $1 trillion in federal dollars, from pandemic unemployment insurance to stimulus checks to the child tax credit checks that went to nearly every parent in America, a guaranteed income for parents the last 6 months last year put money back into people's pockets. Now, this needs to be said that a guaranteed income is a vision of a cash benefit program that is aware and responsive to inequality, focusing on the people who need it most, not replacing the social safety net, but healing its gaps and sitting alongside wages, indeed cheering on the rising of wages, but not supplanting them. Now, we've heard critics sound the alarm that cash support programs could tempt people to stop working altogether, pointing to the so-called Great Resignation. But what we are really seeing here is a great reshuffling and a great upgrade. A shift that is consistent with the data that we are seeing in guaranteed income demonstrations across this country. So in Stockton, a year after receiving the $500 a month, $500 a month with no strings attached, the guaranteed income, the participants found full-time work at double the rate of the control group. Now, these monthly cash supports allowed people to invest in themselves and in their communities, to find a job that paid what they wanted or that worked for their schedule, and to quit one that didn't. What we're seeing now with the Great Reshuffling. According to the Economic Policy Institute data, in 2021, hires were in greater number than quits in all sectors. And this trend is even more pronounced in low-wage sectors, with people leaving jobs that have been underpaying for decades and moving onwards to better paying work. And people didn't simply just quit working thanks to the flexibility that came with cash payments. They were able to take risks and leave for better jobs that they'll stay in. And even more significantly for the movements today, take risks and organize in their own community with fellow workers. Now, I've been watching this surge in labor activity with excitement. From Starbucks workers to Amazon warehouse workers, the movement to organize workers is growing at an extraordinary pace. And all of you who are leading that, thank you. Hats off to you. In the last 6 months, the National Labor Relations Board has recorded a 60% increase in workers filing for petitions that allow for union elections to take place. We believe that direct cash played a role because of its ability to embolden workers in these last years, to give them the stability to demand more. Simply put, cash programs have the potential to supercharge the changes in the labor market that are giving workers their power back, supporting the organizing that so many of you are doing. Now, born out of this moment, a beautiful example of these compounding movements is Coworkers Solidarity Fund. This is coworker.org and their Solidarity Fund. It's made by tech workers for tech workers. This cash fund gives cash supports to people who are organizing in their workplace. And the operating principle, support individual financial resiliency because it catalyzes collective worker power, much like a strike fund, but for organizing. So today we are really excited about the prospect of deliberately bringing together these two parallel movements to explore how a nationwide guaranteed income program can ensure workers have greater power to demand higher wages and better working conditions from their employers, to switch jobs and opt out of taking bad jobs, and to envision together what could be possible for worker power if we had a federal guaranteed income program. What would happen if workers across the country were not solely reliant on low paychecks? If workers everywhere were able to ask for more, how would that impact our labor standards as a country? Today's conversation builds on previous events held at the intersection of cash benefits and worker power. Today, focused on Chicagoland and bringing together both of its local labor and guaranteed income movement leaders to explore how direct cash support programs have and continue to support worker power. Chicago is a historic union town, but it has also recently been a leader in establishing guaranteed income programs. This past November, the city of Chicago announced a guaranteed income program to provide 5,000 Chicago families with $500 per month over 12 months. And in March, Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle announced a $42 million American Rescue Plan funded guaranteed income program. The city of Evanston will be launching a guaranteed income demonstration for residents, and Equity and Transformation Chicago has a demonstration that will also provide $500 a month to post-incarcerated residents in Garfield Park. It's a lot of activity happening in Chicago. And to learn more about the movement and the vision sparking in Chicago, I'd like to pass the mic to Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle to share more. Tony is the 35th president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, a dedicated and effective public servant. Through transparency, increased fiscal responsibility, and improved services that support working families directly, President Preckwinkle has worked to transform county government. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I'm grateful to be here today. And before I get started, I want to thank the folks at the Economic Security Project, Economic Security for Illinois, and Community Change for hosting this event. I'm grateful. You know, workers are the backbone of our communities and our economy. And guaranteed income is one way we can ensure they have the ability to demand the pay, benefits, and working conditions that they deserve. So some of you may know that I'm a history teacher by profession. So before we dive into our panel discussion of how guaranteed income can help workers build power, I want to briefly remind us of Chicago's labor history. Chicago has been at the forefront of America's labor struggles, from demonstrations at Haymarket Square, organizing for an 8-hour workday, to the Chicago Pullman porters leading a nationwide rail strike in response to wage cuts. And we remain here in Chicago at the heart of the labor movement. Thanks to many of our attendees here today. I'm grateful for your dedication to workers and marginalized residents in our region and across the country. I'm proud to be here to connect Chicago's rich labor history to the history we're making within the American Guaranteed Income movement. As Natalie noted, over the past year, we've seen some exciting developments in our city and our county. As an early response to the pandemic, we launched a resident cash assistance program in the fall of 2020 that provided a one-time $600 payment to nearly 14,000 working families in suburban Cook County. 93% of the recipients had either been laid off or had their hours reduced because of the pandemic. But the program was also exceptionally good at targeting historically marginalized communities. 80% of the participants were people of color, 70% were women, and 65% had children. I want to note that from the very beginning, we noticed two key differences between cash assistance and our other response programs. First, the cost to administer emergency cash was significantly less than our other initiatives. Some administrative fees for other relief programs reached 15% or more, but the fee for the direct cash programs was just 4% of the overall fund, meaning that 96% of the program dollars were going directly to recipients. Secondly, we found it was much quicker and easier to launch and administer the emergency cash program compared to our other work. While some of our initiatives took 4 or more months to build, the emergency cash program was up and running in just 2 months. Building on the success of this program, we will soon launch the largest publicly funded guaranteed income program in the country, right here in Cook County. While the parameters of the program are still being finalized, the $42 million pilot will give monthly payments to income eligible Cook County residents over the course of 2 years. We're excited to be opening applications for residents this fall and hope to get the money out the door before the end of the year. And even more significantly, once the 2-year pilot is completed, we will make guaranteed income permanent in the years to come. We're hopeful that our pilot will build off the successes we've seen in Stockton and elsewhere, where guaranteed income is helping people move from part-time to full-time work, move to better jobs, and find the time to go back to school or take on an apprenticeship. We'll make sure to keep attendees here updated on our work. I'm also excited to relay that Cook County is not only playing a significant role in the American Guaranteed Income Program. Across our region, we see government stepping up to meet the needs of residents living in poverty. The city of Chicago, as Natalie relayed, is accepting applications until May 13th. Over 100,000 people have already applied, showing great support for the program. In addition, Equity and Transformation Chicago has a demonstration that provides $500 a month to returning citizens in Garfield Park on the west side. I'm excited to hear more from founder Rich Wallace on our next panel. And finally, the city of Evanston in the North Shore of Cook County will also be piloting a guaranteed income demonstration for residents within their borders. All eyes are on Chicago and Cook County as we launch these pilots. By providing immediate, flexible, and reliable financial support, guaranteed income puts workers in a stronger position to strike for better wages and benefits, seek better opportunities, and leave toxic or abusive employment situations. In closing, I look forward to seeing how guaranteed income empowers the people of Cook County and to working with you all to scale up and organize for guaranteed income across the country. Thank you.
And thank you so much, County President Preckwinkle. Thank you for those historic pearls of wisdom. We're so grateful for your leadership on guaranteed income. And we know that your leadership will light a political spark around the country to help grow our movement for permanent guaranteed income. Hi, everybody. My name is Dorian Warren. I'm co-president of Community Change and Community Change Action. I'm co-chair of the Economic Security Project. And for those of you that don't know, Community Change is a national organization that builds power from the ground up. We work with over 100 grassroots groups around the country. And we believe ultimately that enduring and effective social movements must be led by those most impacted by injustice. I'm also a very proud Chicago native. I hail from the 6th Ward, just a little ways away from County President Preckwinkle's former 4th Ward. My family still lives there. I'm a proud son of a lifetime Chicago Teachers Union member. I'm the grandson of SEIU Local 1 members. That's the janitors local. So the labor movement has always been the air I breathe as a Chicago native son. And it makes me so proud that Cook County is becoming a center for the movement for guaranteed income and labor power. Now, between the leadership from elected officials, President Tony Preckwinkle, thank you again for your leadership, and leadership from the ground up from labor and community-based organizations, there is a story being told here about how to translate material benefits into real worker and community power. Real worker and community power that can win lasting social and economic change for those who need it most. Now, for the remainder of our time here together, we're going to hear from labor and community leaders about why a stronger safety net, why guaranteed income in particular, and why a stronger labor movement need each other and are the essential ingredients for building lasting change. So after hearing from our distinguished speakers, we're going to open it up and bring your questions into the conversation. So please feel free to drop any questions into the chat along the way. But first, we're going to hear from a worker on the front lines of organizing. Lynn Harris is a Starbucks employee who helped unionize the first store in Colorado, and she's graciously agreed to share with us what a guaranteed income would mean for her and others like her. People who are ready to demand better wages and demand better working conditions for themselves and their coworkers, but folks who also understand the risk that come with standing up to corporations.
Hi, my name is Len, or Lender Harris. I am a shift supervisor at Starbucks Coffee Company, and I helped organize the first unionized Starbucks store in Colorado. Why we organized has much to do with wage stagnation, the need for increased and better benefits, updates to old and outdated policies, and just general working conditions that need much improvement, that have not gotten that improvement over time. Now, a guaranteed income, direct cash, no strings attached, would be incredibly helpful to that, because much of this is a risk. Organizing is a risk, and the biggest risk that we have to take and don't have much to give is financial support. With a guaranteed income, it would help provide workers like me the ability to take these risks, to organize together, to stand up to these companies and leverage our power, our collective power, and make the demands that we need. It would also help provide sort of a de facto strike fund. My store is a great example of that. We wanted to perform a workout, but we did not have the hours to spare. I know plenty of people who've been fired due to organizing. My store didn't have anybody fired for organizing, but our hours were slashed severely. Many of us had to get second jobs just to get by. And that's another way that guaranteed income would be able to help us. We wouldn't be at the mercy of companies scraping us over the coals, making us live paycheck to paycheck. We would be able to perform our rights as workers and as citizens. And even then some for me personally, I would be able to spend more energy and more resources on myself and my fellow person, because I wouldn't be spending every bit of it trying to live paycheck to paycheck. So thank you for joining this event. Thank you for listening to my story, and thank you for learning more about how guaranteed income can help you and me as workers get by in this society.
Thanks so much, Lynn. And I think Lynn sums up in a very tangible way the freedom and power that comes from guaranteed income. The material benefit doesn't replace what workers get on the job. Let's be clear about that. But guaranteed income gives workers the power to demand more from their jobs and the freedom to do so. So with that, I want to transition to our conversation with Don Vallar. He is Secretary Treasurer of the Chicago Federation of Labor. Don himself was born into the labor movement and frankly into a broader spirit of social justice. His father was on strike, fighting for better wages and benefits for bank workers in the Philippines when he was born. And like many seeking a better life for their young children, his parents and 3 siblings immigrated to the US. And thanks to an SEIU represented security guard job at a Loop office building, Don attended and graduated from UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, in 1991. He then became a member of the National Association of Broadcast Employees and Technicians, CWA Local 41. It's a union representing broadcast news and TV production workers in Chicago. And after an illustrious career, I'm not going to say how many years, Don, but after almost 2 decades in broadcast journalism, as he got a law degree, by the way, along the way, he was elected vice president of Local 41 and then president in 2015 prior to becoming secretary treasurer of the Chicago Fed. So Don, I want to get you talking, and let's start with getting your views on what's happening with the labor movement right now, because we've been seeing and hearing and experiencing just a sweeping wave of labor action around the country. And in fact, just yesterday, hundreds of childcare providers went on strike to protest the terrible pay and working conditions they face because the government isn't investing in childcare. So what is energizing workers right now to take action?
Thanks, Dorian, and thank you for having me. There are so many reasons why the labor movement is energized right now. I mean, the biggest one is because of the consequences of the pandemic. I mean, 2 years, and workers. I mean, even leading up to the pandemic, I mean, workers were already under a lot of stress and pressure, and all of a sudden we had this pandemic hit, and then we had workers die on the job. Workers who were, through no fault of their own, all of a sudden they lost opportunities. Their lives were disrupted. So it opened up the eyes of a lot of workers to what's going on. And that, by the way, it's like they finally realized, like, I'm not going to take it anymore. We're not going to take it. All this abuse that we've dealt with for decades, and that's not new. I mean, and we see that in the organizing that you mentioned at Starbucks, the Amazon, lots of great movements going on right now. And locally, we had some really successful labor actions. Just last month, we had the WTTW IBW 1220 strike. For the first time ever, there was a strike at public television in Chicago in the history of broadcast in Chicago. And the successful strike, again, workers there, they said, we're not going to take it anymore. We worked during the pandemic. We busted our hump during the pandemic while everybody else could stay home. They went to work to report the news, to talk about the dangers. And then when it came to bargaining, the employer didn't want to respect and value what they had to do. We talked about Nabisco. The Nabisco strike last year. And the El Milagro action, the mechanic strike. So all these workers, they said they were fed up. Like, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going on strike. We're not going to take this abuse, and they mobilized. And actually, the biggest motivating factor, actually, another big motivating factor is the Biden administration. The Biden administration started rolling back a lot of the rules, the rules, the labor laws, and the NLRB rules that sort of kept workers down, pounded them down, and then again promoting labor. I think promoting workers in every way, and lifting up workers, and with the Protect the Right to Organize Act that they're trying to push through. But again, that's stalled right. But hopefully, that's another element that can help workers. And actually, the equation has changed. As you mentioned, the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffling has created a tight labor market. And actually, a lot of our unions have reported out that because of that, they're seeing better bargaining conditions when they bargain with management. Hey, some of the employers are more than willing to give better wages and better benefits to keep and retain those workers. So workers are finally seeing some respect at unionized shop. And then just the assistance that came during the pandemic, the unemployment benefits that boosted people up, and that kept people's heads above water during that difficult time. Yeah. So having a strong safety net during the pandemic is it's one big factor that's giving workers courage and opportunity to really demand better, to demand something better, and then we're not going to take it anymore.
So Don, I want to emphasize a really important point you make, and for those listening and watching, government agencies might seem pretty abstract and a little wonky, but wow, to have a National Labor Relations Board that is on the side of workers for once, and particularly a general counsel who is actually enforcing the law and enabling workers to organize with a little less fear. It's just a watershed, I think, at least in our lifetimes in terms of the National Labor Relations Board. But I want to pivot to something you just said, and it's about another role of government. And that is the role of government cash assistance and what role it could play in shoring up worker power. So you in particular come out of the union that represented broadcast news workers who went on strike, a historic strike in the 90s. And I think that strike provided some lessons about the role that government assistance can play. In your case, it was around unemployment insurance, or UI. So talk to us a little bit about your job and role in that strike, and how did unemployment insurance factor into the course that the strike took?
We went on strike in 1998. We did a 2-day strike at ABC. I come out of WLS TV, local news here, part of ABC. We struck them for 2 days, and after 2 days, we decided we're going to go back to work, and the company locked us out for 11 weeks. 11 weeks they locked us out, and that was in the middle of winter. It was cold. It was a tough strike. Yeah, I had a member, my strike partner. He died during the strike. He was an older gentleman, and it was just a brutal nature. I mean, because we were striking in the middle of winter, or November is when we walked out, and I lost one of my good friends during the strike. It was just around Thanksgiving. We were walking the picket line, and my friend John, he was feeling real cold. It's like, I told John, sit back and just sit. I'll walk the picket line by myself, and you get warm in the car. And Thanksgiving, I said goodbye to him, and then he never came back. He had a heart attack later that day, and was in the hospital and died. So that strike really, it just shows, like, we were fighting so hard for our dignity, for respect, for our value. And then the unemployment insurance here in Illinois, we all applied, all the striking workers applied for unemployment, because remember, through no fault of your own, you lose, and you're out of work through no fault of your own. And a lockout is technically no fault of your own. Yeah. In New York and LA, where our sister locals had gone on strike at ABC, the governors of those two states okayed unemployment insurance for strikers in those states, and also Washington, D.C. But here in Illinois, we had a Republican governor and a Republican-controlled UI. They put they blocked our unemployment insurance. So the only monies that we could receive during the strike was a small little strike stipend. It was really tough for a lot of working families during the strike, because I know they struggled, and a lot of folks had to pick up some extra work, which is they had to do. You have to do that to find some to support your families. But it really highlighted the fact that that safety net that is so vital that to rise up, right, to take a stand, because if you don't, it makes it that fear. I mean, there's always a fear when you go on strike. How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to put a roof over my head? How am I and in the wintertime, how am I going to keep pay the heating bills, right? And those are stuff that weigh on you when you go on strike, or you take that action to demand something better. And that was so important. And to have that safety net, would sort of help people along. I mean, people aren't going to get rich here. Right. People just need a little something to get by, to support themselves, and give them the courage to demand better.
Don, I want to thank you for sharing that really personal reflection, and especially of the loss of your friend and fellow coworker. I want to ask you one last question for now, and that is to zoom back out, and as you reflect back on the moment in which the labor movement finds itself right now, say a little bit about what you think are the critical pieces of a guaranteed income agenda that we need to fight for, that would shore up, I mean, this is to your very last point, that would shore up worker power, labor power, and folks would have a floor under which to be able to take risks. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Right, yeah, absolutely. That safety net is so critical. I mean, and all the strikes and all the labor actions that we see today, my first question to folks is there a strike fund? Do you guys have what you need to survive? And oftentimes, folks don't have that. I mean, and in the strike fund is a small stipend, and it's so critical that they get some sort of additional assistance, because they're taking a stand, right? They're taking a stand for something better, and when they take a stand, guess what? It's going to improve the lives of others down the road. I mean, just back to that IBW 1220 strike, the WTTW strike. By those folks taking a stand and fighting, guess what? Maybe some of the other stations in town, they're going to see that, and they're going to say, maybe we shouldn't bargain so hard or lead or force the union to go on a strike. But that's really important to have that. That's some sort of assistance for workers. And on top of that, I mean, again, labor laws to protect workers, labor laws to protect their rights and give them a voice. We need that, and again, but I think financial assistance is so important for workers, to give them the courage to stand up. to take a stand. And then actually, let's get all the other laws to make it so much easier, to make it stronger, to make it easier for workers to organize, to find their voice, and to get out there and demand justice.
Don Vallar, Secretary Treasurer of the Great Chicago Federation of Labor, more local ones in the city of Chicago than any other place in America. That means more unions were founded in Chicago than any other place. Don, we really appreciate your leadership and insights. And thank you for helping us set the stage for our next conversation, which we're going to have a panel of organizers and advocates to talk about this connection between guaranteed income and labor power. So thank you again, Don. Now, before we transition to that panel, I want to take a moment to hear from Daniela. Daniela is a single mother in New York City, and when the pandemic hit, she was working not one, not two, but 3 jobs and still struggling to get by. And when the library closed and Chipotle cut her hours, Daniela went from struggling to not being able to make rent. Now, at the same time, she found out she was pregnant, and she was looking for shelters when she got notice that she would be receiving a guaranteed income from the Bridge Project. And so for 3 years, Daniela and her son will receive a guaranteed income every month, no strings attached, and it's already having a huge impact on her life. So let's take a look and a listen.
Compared to what I have to spend on rent, on food, on the baby. And there's 4 things, it's rent, food, baby, and me. And my salary is not enough for that. So with the cash that the Bridge Project gives me, I don't have to suffer about diapers because they are expensive. I'm telling you right now. I was blown away at how much they're more expensive than feminine hygiene pads. And I think that's very unfair. And they're not included in WIC. They're not included in the food stamp. They're not included anywhere. I have to fend for myself for diapers, and my child uses them up to 6 to 8 times a day. He uses so many diapers. And so that is the reason why I'm I am so grateful for the fact that I can provide my child with a basic needs like diapers and baby wipes. Because if I didn't have this, I don't know what I would do. I really don't. I have an education. I have a bachelor's degree. I went to college. I work for this city. I work for CUNY, but yet I'm still struggling. And the fact that this money is coming in is going to allow me to progress for my child and break that curse that my mom couldn't break because she was an immigrant. She didn't have those resources. And if she did, I think my story would be different. So right now I'm rewriting my story for me and my family and my child by trying to fight all the odds.
Rewriting her story. And listen, let me just pause and say, diapers, baby wipes are real and they're expensive. I have a 19-month-old. We go through lots of diapers a day. As Daniela said, WIC and SNAP does not cover diapers. So this is real. And as she said at the end of her story, she's rewriting her story. And in some ways, that's what we're all doing here. We're rewriting history in this country. We're demanding a rebalancing of power, and we're working together to get there. So let me bring some more leaders into this conversation. I want to introduce our panel, and then we're going to jump right in. So Pete DeMay is the organizing director of the Chicago and Midwest Regional Joint Board Workers United, which is affiliated with SEIU. He's responsible for helping build and execute organizing strategy at workplaces like Starbucks right there in the Midwest. Richard Wallace is founder and executive director of Equity and Transformation Chicago, or EAT. He has served on the City of Chicago's advisory committee for its guaranteed income pilot, and he's also leading the development of EAT's own GI pilot, guaranteed income pilot, for formerly incarcerated residents on the west side of Chicago. And last but not least, Audra Wilson is the president and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, and she's been a champion for racial and economic justice for more than 20 years as a public interest lawyer, as a teacher, as a policy shaper, as a community mobilizer, and an experienced executive manager. Throughout her career, Wilson has focused on the voices and experiences of communities of color and communities most impacted by injustice. And the Shriver Center has been playing a leading role in the movement for guaranteed income. So welcome to all 3 of you. And Richard, I want to start with you because you have your own pilot program. So talk to us about who you're trying to reach. What's the support you're giving? How are you organizing the basics of your guaranteed income pilot? just give us a flavor for it. How much money, how often? Talk to us about your pilot.
Yes, and I'm on the west side, so you're gonna hear sirens. And you may hear one right now. It's coming closer. As it gets closer, there we go. And we're going. So we're gonna be dealing with this momentarily throughout this presentation. But again, my name is Richard Wallace. I'm the founding executive director of Equity and Transformation, also known as EAT. August 23rd, 2021, we launched the Chicago Future Fund, which is focused on providing direct cash payments in the amount of $500 a month to formerly incarcerated West Garfield Park residents. That program really grew out of the needs that we saw during the beginning of the pandemic. We were doing a lot of our mutual aid, which was a cash transfer. We really didn't have the terminology or the language of guaranteed income at the time. It was just like, we knew our people were boxed out of the CARES Act because they hadn't filed taxes in the last 5 years, so they had no work histories, and they owed child support. Some of them owed child support, so they were excluded, but yet these were the folks who needed it most. We considered people who hadn't paid child support because they couldn't, because they hadn't been working, were probably in the most need in the middle of the pandemic. And so we began doing direct cash payments in the form of rent support, and that grew into what we now have is the Chicago Future Fund. And that program is it's looking at income volatility, psychological wellness, physical functioning, and last but not least, we're looking at recidivism. We chose West Garfield Park in particular because that community, the average per capita income there is around $11,900 a year. The cost of living in Chicago is almost, to find a 3-bedroom apartment is around $3,000. So the equation is not equitable, right? There's no way you can squeeze $11,900 into $3,000 a month, right? And so we focus on informal workers, or the folks that are boxed out of the formal economy due to things like ableism, transphobia, the mark of a criminal record. And I chose that, and I will say specifically, I came from labor. I was a labor organizer for a number of years in Chicago, organizing the temp labor sector. And as time went on, I was seeing a lot of our folks that were engaging in informality were engaging in it because of denial from the formal economy, right? Whether it be background checks or staffing agencies not accepting them due to their background, et cetera. Folks were literally boxed out. So it would leave people with records to their own creativity. Sometimes it was detrimental to create a form of income where there wasn't one. And so for me, it was like, we have to begin to build the capacity of these folks in order to get into, strong union jobs. And we can't just, discuss them without including them in the process, right? And so for me, it was like, how do we begin to engage Black informal workers and then help them develop programs that that create better conditions for themselves, right? And so we landed on the Chicago Future Fund, and I'm excited about it. We have 30 West Garfield Park residents that are receiving $500 a month. They're all between the ages of 18 and 35. We chose that demographic because they are the highest at risk as it relates to unemployment. Also, they are the highest at risk as it relates to intra-community violence. So for us, it was super important that if we're going to begin to mend the gap, to build any form of equity, we have to start in West Garfield Park.
So Richard, I hope folks listening have heard just how amazing this innovative idea and project that you have launched really is. I want to pick up on something you said about the mark of a criminal record and the challenges, particularly of folks with a record of finding employment, and ask you to talk a little bit about the relationship between guaranteed income and work. So we know that guaranteed income can actually help workers stay attached to jobs if they have them. We know guaranteed income can help workers find jobs. It can empower workers to change their working conditions in the context of formerly incarcerated people. And we know there are so many barriers, right, of folks with the mark of a criminal record in terms of employment. What kind of impact do you want guaranteed income in your pilot to have on the participants' ability to find and stay in good jobs?
Yeah, so I always think about the fact that, living wage union employment is what we need, but we're often left with precarious informal labor opportunities, and that's what we have, right? We all know, I think everybody on this call understands, specifically, if they're unions on the call that when our local government invests in infrastructure, it produces jobs. I think for us at EAT, we see the people as infrastructure, right? And if you invest in the people, it will produce jobs. I don't think that narrative should be shifted in any way. I worked in procurement for a number of years, for a year, and we would we did inclusive procurement. Essentially, we would build strategies to create community benefits agreements on the front end of negotiations. And on the back end, we would produce union jobs, et cetera, but it requires city spending, right? So if you think about rail car development coming back to Chicago, Pullman Porters, but it's happening again. RRC is opening a site where they're producing rail cars. And that took big investments by the city to produce that facility that is now producing union jobs. And so for us, we look at this guaranteed income equation in the same way. We need our city to invest in the people, and we believe that the people ultimately it will remove material barriers to full-time employment for our folks. A lot of our folks, if you're thinking about the equation, $11,900 a year is what folks are making in West Garfield Park. That's the average per capita income. Average rent is around $3,000, like I said. And so how do you get to $3,000 without creating real interventions to ensure that people have some form of income when they often have none at all? And so for me, I feel like the guaranteed income movement, when I read the SEED project, the SEED study in Stockton, and I saw the results, I was like, we have to get involved, right? We saw that the material barriers to full-time employment were reduced. We saw increases in psychological wellness. And for me, I was like, this is exactly what Chicago communities, and when I say Chicago, I'm talking about Austin, Inglewood, West Garfield Park, the communities need. This is what they need in order to get that foot up so that they can get into formal employment opportunities, so that they can meet basic needs, so that they can challenge the inflation that's happening in the housing market, and they can actually be able to provide for themselves. And so that's essentially where I think our analysis around guaranteed income comes from. And that is that we have to invest in the people. No different than if you leave a road and you don't invest in it, you got potholes up and down the streets. There's always a demand to invest in the streets to fix them, right? And that investment also produces union jobs, right? And so for me, we have to begin to look at this equation in the same way. You invest in the people, and the people and those people will ultimately, fulfill jobs and do all the good things. So that's my take.
Rich, I want to ask you one more quick question, which is really the organizing question. So and then I'll bring in Pete and Audra. So Don Vallar said earlier that just giving people guaranteed income doesn't necessarily mean they'll be organized in some way. So, it takes organizing groups like yours to do that. So between your pilot, the city of Chicago's pilot, the Cook County pilot, there are a good number of people to go out and organize. I think President Preckwinkle said 100,000 folks had applied, maybe, or I heard that number somewhere earlier. So talk to us briefly about what's the vision for organizing people getting guaranteed income to demand more from their government and from employers.
Yeah, 100K. Thank you for the comment in the chat. And so 100,000 applied. And so for us, it is about the people reimagining how local governments can show up in their life, right? I think during the pandemic, we saw our local governments do things we didn't know were possible. We're like, we can get a check from the government, right? And it was like, well, wait, hold on, and there's no strings attached. And so for us, it was, for our base, it became a political instrument, because it's like, yes, this can be consistent. This can be a commitment by your local government. This can be an intervention that is permanent if you advocate for it. And the best way to actually, I think I think our people are beyond the idea of you explaining to them what the intervention will do. And I think that the guaranteed income community of practice, what it does, it allows us to actually create alternative models for them to experience, right? And that experience alone is something that they can take to the voting booth. That experience alone is something that they can advocate for at the job. And so for us, it's just like increasing, I think the investment of guaranteed income is an investment in the agency of workers. And so when we do that, we have better outcomes as a city, as a society, as a community.
Thanks, Rich. Stay with us because I am going to bring you back to the conversation, but I want to shift to Pete DeMay from Workers United and Hello, dear old friend. You are on the front lines of what may be the biggest spike in union organizing in the last several decades. I think I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. So tell us a little bit about who you're organizing and the factors that are motivating workers to organize in this moment.
Thank you, Dorian. It's great to see you again. Yeah, we're Workers United, a very old union. Our roots are in the clothing and textile industry, but our members today tend to be in industries like clothing distribution, industrial laundries, and in jobs like food service, much like the Starbucks workers. At Starbucks, Dorian, workers tend to be quite young. We're looking at 18 to 25-year-olds, probably the most common age band. Many are LGBTQ. It's a demographic cohort with a lot of courage and a lot of fight. These are young people under no illusion that the current economic system is somehow going to benefit them because they've lived through 2 recessions and a pandemic. And they realize that society, sort of as it's built now, just isn't constructed to protect them. Additionally, a lot of them have done what their parents and what their teachers have told them to do. They've, gone to college or they're going to college, but they still find that their options are limited in today's economy. It's definitely the college educated, not exclusively, but a lot, a college educated working class working at Starbucks, much like the speaker from Chipotle in New York. We're starting to see that more and more. Starbucks workers are fighting back now because they saw that the company and the nation, as Richard alluded to, could do better during the pandemic. And they've seen that the company has taken advantage of the post-pandemic economy to just not do better for folks, but to nickel and dime them and squeeze everybody while raking in record profits for the shareholders. In fact, Starbucks stores are often dangerous places to work. You think about like a factory being dangerous. Starbucks is just as dangerous when the company doesn't invest in the machinery, doesn't invest in safety, doesn't take safeguards to protect baristas from aggressive customers who are just seem to have lost their patience during the pandemic and throw drinks on them and stuff like that, which is more uncommon than you would think, unfortunately. And these places are staffed to the bone, which makes it even harder, puts workers under more stress and in a more dangerous situation. And the company does this, it's not an accident and it's not outside forces, it's the company does it on purpose so they can make more money for the shareholders and for the owners, and so they can meet their numbers and continue to reach record profits. The campaign is exploding now because I think workers are finding a sense of belonging in their union. I think Starbucks worked hard at one point to create like this sort of like neoliberal like culture of where people could sort of find their family at Starbucks. But that's really taken a back seat. And I think people are finding that community, but they're finding it with each other in their union, and they're finding that community in the fight for economic and social justice. Starbucks workers are finding a way to engage in strikes without a guaranteed income of any kind. I mean, but it's harder than it should be. They're cobbling it together through like GoFundMe's, through different sorts of mutual aid and things like that. And, they're going to find a way to win, I feel, through that sort of thing or through union strike funds, but it shouldn't be that hard. And if the economy, if there's going to be a true strike wave and a wave towards economic justice that includes Trader Joe's and Chipotle and McDonald's, there's going to have to be some sort of guaranteed income to make that happen, because you run out of GoFundMe money, you run out of strike fund money. If there's going to be a fundamental change in the economy, there needs to be guaranteed income. It would be huge for workers who are organizing, and it would result, I think, in improved wages, benefits, and working conditions across the board. Workers would be able to go on strike more frequently, and the duration of those strikes would be longer, which would allow them to win more. So that's what's going on at Starbucks, Dorian, and it is exciting.
So Pete, let me ask you a quick clarifying question, and correct me on my numbers. So 50 Starbucks stores that have been unionized through elections, another 200 have petitioned. Is that right? And what's the story in Illinois in particular?
I mean, I would say we're closer to probably in that 250 range now. And the numbers keep increasing. I work in a region of the union where we cover 14 states. I think probably 8 of those have active campaigns, and we're in the 70, 75 range. So it's really been exploding. In Illinois, a little slower getting going than some other states for just random reasons, but I think we're really catching fire now in Chicago. We've had 2 stores already unionized in Illinois, in Cary and Peoria. And we have, I think it's 8 elections coming up in Chicago. So it's a very exciting time for the campaign.
That's huge. And Pete, I want to come back to you in a little bit on a broader question about the role of the labor movement, but I want to get Audra Wilson in the conversation, another longtime friend who's been doing the work in Chicago and around the country. So Audra, tell us a little bit about why the Shriver Center is in favor of guaranteed income.
Ooh. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say hi to Richard and Pete. Thanks so much. These are great comments, and I'm going to be repeating a lot of the good stuff that's been said all day, and also with Don's comments as well. But so for Shriver, I mean, in a nutshell, the Shriver Center believes that the power of guaranteed income to tackle systemic inequities and the legacy of structural racism in the United States. So all of us who are here know that it's impossible to extricate race from poverty in the United States, and that the barriers that people living in poverty face are as a result of very specific policies that were enacted to limit the growth and long-term development of communities of color, in particular Black and Brown communities. And that's why you see that Black and Latinx families face discrimination in employment and housing and access to government benefits. They suffer higher rates of poverty and have been unable to build generational wealth. Now, unlike a universal basic income, which is a term that's been thrown around a bit, a guaranteed income program channels money to people who truly need it. So as a result, guaranteed income programs are more effective at reducing the racial wealth gap and also increasing equity. And across the country, we've been seeing that pilot programs that offer this guaranteed income to residents have measurably improved participants' financial stability, which we heard from the top of this webinar. And these pilot programs are beginning to demonstrate that guaranteed income programs provide assistance to families in need very quickly, with very little bureaucracy, and they can really fill the gaps that are left by existing social safety net programs. Now, one other thing that's really of interest for those of us today is just how much guaranteed income can actually put pressure on employers to improve wages and working conditions. So we've been throwing around this term about the Great Resignation, which, if you're like me, I found that very offensive term, quite frankly. Employers were complaining that during the pandemic, governments, were supporting expanded unemployment insurance, the child tax credit, EITC, stimulus checks. This meant that workers could quit, sit at home, do nothing, and possibly make more money if they were, than if they were working. And we heard these are just recycling tropes, very old tropes, particularly about poor people who are undeserving. Even when it came to the second stimulus check, that those tropes really came to the surface when people said that, well, we can't incentivize people to stay home. But the fact of the matter is that we know there was a very obvious overrepresentation of people of color in lower wage jobs and service industries with little access to paid time off, to childcare. Remember, in the beginning of the pandemic, they had very little access to the personal protective equipment. So they were the ones who were, front and center and at most risk of being sick. And you're also talking about individuals who lived in households with multi-generational households. So they risk getting their families sick. So that's why guaranteed income is a really great organizing tool to build worker power, as you've been hearing over and over. Because employers clearly were not providing enough pay and benefits. but guaranteed income can help level the playing field between business and labor, and push businesses towards fair compensation and work and for a future without the workers that they need. The other thing that I would say too is that guaranteed income is particularly important, and I'm kind of repeating myself, but in these spaces where these are individuals who've traditionally had less power, Black, Latinx workers, undocumented workers, people perceived to be undocumented, people with criminal histories that were seeking employment, as Richard already talked about. These were individuals who were already facing a severe wage gap as compared to their white male counterparts. And they were also facing very severe unemployment gaps. So for example, Black unemployment is much higher than white unemployment. So guaranteed income programs would particularly help those workers who unfortunately on the surface were a bit worse off than their counterparts. And these are the workers that the Shriver Center really focuses on the most.
So Audra, one more question for you before I want to open it up to the three of you with a couple of questions, including from the chat. Just a reminder, if you have questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So Audra, you're in Chicago, the Shriver Center is in Chicago. Talk to us a little bit about your hopes for both the City of Chicago pilot and the Cook County pilot programs.
So I'm excited. I am so excited. I mean, first of all, being in the third largest city of the country, to have not only the city, but the county be launching this is just a very exciting thing. And, working with my team here at the Shriver Center, I mean, obviously, as you mentioned from the top of the webinar, this has been a real focal point for us. I mean, this is a huge opportunity. I think it's important for folks to understand, though, that this, along with the many other pilots happening around the country, which I know we've seen have been successful, and the ones that they're inspiring launches of other pilots around the country. But it is just we're almost scratching the surface, so to speak. I mean, these pilots are exceedingly important, but we know that there are so many more people who are in need. What I do hope from pilots, especially as large as Chicago and Cook County, need to think to a 2-year, the largest publicly funded pilot. This can really be the catalyst for a federal program, which is what we really need to be thinking about. And that's where all of our efforts really need to be leading. And so I'm hoping that what comes out of these pilots, along with other pilots that have been launched, as well as in California and across the country, we're able to gather enough information. I mean, it's no longer anecdotal. I mean, it's empirical data that we are building to show how effective these programs are, how they can truly lift people out of poverty, how families now are empowered to be able to make the decisions that make the most sense for themselves economically. So, so to the extent that Chicago is able to lead the charge in that with the expansiveness of its 2 pilot programs, I'm very excited about it. But we're hoping that this is going to be inspiring not only movement across the country, but eventually pushing us towards that federal program.
Audra Wilson putting a stake in the ground around not just local and state pilots, but a federal permanent guaranteed income. So thank you for that. I actually want to get all three of you in conversation here. And a reminder to the audience members, please put any questions you might have for the panel in the chat. So I'd love to hear each of your reflections on how you think about the interconnectedness of the guaranteed income movement and the labor movement. And by the way, it's not lost on me that last year we did this, to your point, Audra, we did this national experiment at guaranteed income for kids. We called it the expanded child tax credit. We have all the data. There's even new data out now from Columbia, I think yesterday, around the impact on families struggling to make ends meet. We're not at a loss for data to go at the tropes, and it's going to take a bit more than data. It's going to take some other kinds of storytelling to break through the racialized and gendered tropes around who deserves cash and who doesn't. And I raised the CTC expansion last year because it's not lost on me that last year was the 25th anniversary of so-called welfare reform, where we actually made an opposite policy choice that was punitive and mean-spirited and racist and sexist, right, to cut people off. Last year, we did the opposite, right? So there is something happening here in this moment in which we find ourselves. And yes, there's so much else happening in the country. I just want to acknowledge we are definitely in uncertain and trying times. But talk to us about the interconnectedness of the movement around guaranteed income and the labor movement. How can these movements contribute to one another? What's the potential, even right here in Chicago, to shift power to working people in some way via guaranteed income? So any one of you that wants to jump in on this question between the relationship between the guaranteed income movement and the labor movement.
Yeah, I'll let you start.
I can jump in. I would just say that, if you look back, whether it's the 8-hour day or whether it's, ACA, whether it's minimum wage hikes, to $15 in dozens of municipalities or states, the labor movement has played a leading role. And I think, the discussion has to change to guaranteed income. I think, labor has, it has political power, it's boots on the ground, it's PAC dollars, it's juice that should be used to something that will not only improve people's lives, but will also effectively grow the movement. And so I think that's a conversation that has to be had in the House of Labor, and I think it's overdue.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. Oh, I'm sorry, Richard. It's jumping in here. Absolutely second what Pete said. And it's interesting when you let off, Dorian, talking about the expansion of the CTC. We know, I've said over and over to folks that it's not a matter of having this information, it's a matter of will. So the CTC is a perfect example of that. It has been an extraordinarily powerful weapon against poverty. It has lifted millions of children out of poverty. And the expansion of CTC has the potential to lift millions more. And then we know when you're lifting children out of poverty, then you're also talking about their well-being on a longer term. It's not just about economic lifting out of poverty. You're talking about performance outcomes. You're talking about just better outcomes overall for kids. So there is a ton of information that's out there to support this. This is nothing shocking or new, and you don't need pilots or any more reports to be able to substantiate this. But what we do need and that we don't have right now is enough will. To make these things permanent, to really elevate this conversation, and to make these sort of demands, which is why we're all here today and why it's, I think, very important to make sure that the movements are aligned, because we're talking about the well-being of the workers. And remember, these are the individuals upon whom we were so dependent in the height of the pandemic. These are folks that we took for granted when many of us on this webinar right now, were able to work from home. That was a luxury that we had, to not have to expose ourselves. But these are individuals that didn't have that choice. They didn't have that luxury. And yet we couldn't sit here today had it not been for the sacrifices. So that's why we need to really start to make these sorts of demands and not have to continue to try to prove ourselves as to why this needs to be in place.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you all. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the one thing that people in power fear the most is a population with both security and time, right? Guaranteed income provides people time. One of the biggest challenges that I have in organizing people for social change, whether it be going to the voting booth, et cetera, is that they're in a consistent grind to create capital, oftentimes where there is none, right? And so, participating in democracy becomes an additional ask because with a person that has very little time, right? And so I feel for me, the hope around guaranteed income, and I think the intersection as it relates to labor, is that it affords our people time and some sense of security, which gives them more freedom to participate in democracy. And that through democracy, right, essentially what we mean by democracy is that if a decision is made that impacts your life, you have to play a role in how that decision is made. We can get to stronger working class solidarity across the board, right? And working class solidarity is something that we often talk about, but it's disjointed in the moment, right? You have folks who have strong union jobs and you have folks that are stuck in informality, right? You have folks that are stuck not within the ranks of union labor, where they probably are safest. Right. And so for people to begin to advocate for themselves and demand better workplace treatment, et cetera, they need security and time. And guaranteed income provides some components of that And so, and for me, I feel like that's the intersection that I would like to, continue to wrestle with and learn more about as we expand agency through some of these pilots throughout the country.
Security and time. I just want to stay on that really profound insight for a second, Rich, because Pete, you had mentioned sort of the history, and I think we heard from Don earlier, sort of the history, and frankly, President Preckwinkle, of the labor movement in Chicago and the fight, Haymarket rings a bell, the fight for the 40-hour work week and the 8-hour day. And if you remember the old saying, what did workers want? 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. 8 hours for time. And God forbid that workers would spend some of that free time organizing to create more power to advance justice. So I so appreciate that, that point, Rich, in terms of the time and ability for people to not only rest, but to actually organize. And you also said something else that's about power. So I want to get to the power question. I want to talk about funding. So one of the questions in the chat is from, I think, Laura Goodman, who asked about innovative funding ideas. So how do we pay for guaranteed income? How do we explain who pays for these programs? How does it not hurt the people that it seems to help in terms of paying for, paying via taxes? Talk to us about any innovations in funding these programs, and what are the power shifts, frankly, both the mindset and the power shifts that need to happen in terms of fully funding a guaranteed income program around the country.
I mean, I've got some ideas, just sort of piggybacking off what Richard mentioned. Is this, we spend money for job creation. It's just, I think we take it as a matter of fact that part of our tax dollars are going to be going to create jobs. But what does that really look like? And I think in our city, a lot of times it's for big TIF boondoggles, it's like Lincoln Yards, millions and millions of tax breaks. Why shouldn't that money be going to a guaranteed income, which would sort of spur more union organization and making more of the jobs we already have good jobs? Why are we spending so much money on police that isn't necessarily raising our standards of living, when that money could be dedicated towards a guaranteed income and tackling some of the root causes of crime? I think we have more resources than we believe when it comes to these sorts of programs, but there has to be the political will to spend them on safety nets.
Audra or Rich? How you gonna pay for all this? Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I'll say, we spend $33,000 a year to keep someone incarcerated, right? And we know that this system has not worked. And this is where the intersection, and this is also where we have to, I think, broaden the edges of our labor fight, is that, our folks are getting paid pennies on the hour behind the prison walls, right? It costs $33,000 a year to keep someone incarcerated. A guaranteed income pilot for 1 year costs $6,000 per individual. I think all taxpayers, if it is, we can say definitively that increases in psychological wellness, increases in employment security, et cetera, through guaranteed income would actually create safer communities. Then we need to begin to, so I think that for me, we did a lot of work around dismantling systems. Where I've seen a lot of joy in our communities is around the alternatives that we're talking about rebuilding. And so the guaranteed income pilot for me in equity and transformation has been really the actualization of an alternative to incarceration for our folks. We know that for a fact, when in the middle of the pandemic, they called it looting in the city of Chicago, we saw folks taking resources that they needed resources, right? And so we're like, how do we begin to put income in our communities in a meaningful way, right? Like, folks don't need to be stealing from grocery stores. Folks need to have the resources they need in order to buy groceries when they need them, right? And so for us, it's like, this serves as for us, it serves as a clear alternative, right, to incarceration, which has been a failed system that we continue to reinvest in, that study after study has concluded. And I think that's unique too, is that when you create alternatives, they're like, demand for the results are immediate. Show us how it's actually creating safer conditions. And I'm like, well, show me when prisons have ever made safer conditions for our community, and it just hasn't, right? And so I think the conversations are complementary in that the alternative to increase investment in prisons can be guaranteed income.
Audra, can I ask you in particular, because I first met you working on a political campaign, and so to the taxing and the resources and the political choices in front of us, I guess I want to also ask you to respond to the question of how do we get political support for taxing the wealthy or other resources to provide for guaranteed income. So can you talk to us about the politics here a little bit too?
How come I don't get the softball question? So, the hardest question of all. Yes, I just want to echo what Richard said about just making sense of our investments. Because for a country that purports to be so concerned about our investments and return on investments, it would make absolutely no sense to be investing the amount of money that we're investing in a prison industrial complex. But the political will thing is a much harder thing, especially when you're talking about taxation. I know a lot of the rhetoric has been out there about more tax to the wealthy. It's whole campaigns have been run on this, and certainly it resonates in many ways when we talk about those on Main Street versus Wall Street. I mean, we've heard this all before. For some, it's a battle cry, it's a rallying cry. For others, it's just they're very resistant. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dorian, but ESB has even proposed things like continued expansion of the tax code to expand the existing earned income tax credit program to capture those who are not making any income at all, as Richard alluded to. And I think that was a proposal that came from the New Schools Institute on Race and Political Economy. Those sorts of expansions, because we're already seeing success with the expansion of programs even throughout the pandemic, I think might be more politically palatable. And I think that, combined with the fact that you're seeing these pilots and the evidence that's coming out of these pilots about what people are able to do with this money and how they're able to really help their families and lift them out of poverty, might be sort of an easier way to be able to make this happen. In the current political climate in which we sit, obviously it's very challenging to figure out how we make this more palatable, but I do think, I'm always the eternal optimist, that there is a bit of a groundswell. And seeing these pilots and extrapolating the results from these pilots across the country, especially municipalities that look very different from each other, to see the success that they're having, combined with the continued expansion of these programs that we have already for families who are lower income, could be possibly the key.
Audra Wilson, Pete DeMay, Richard Wallace, thank you. Thank you for this insightful, provocative conversation. And thanks for the work each of you do. Really, really appreciate your role in this fight. So listen, I'm going to start to close, but there's more, so don't go anywhere. Let me just say that this movement is not only in Chicago. You have likely heard about the recent victory on Staten Island, where Amazon workers voted to unionize, demanding higher pay, job safety, job security. And then there are a whole bunch of workers, a whole bunch of folks who work in hospitality in the DMV area. That's the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. And those workers saw firsthand how precarious their income was when the pandemic shut down restaurants and hotels. So we have someone with us. So V, a worker and organizer with Restaurant Opportunity Center DC, had a provocative, innovative idea to develop a 5-year guaranteed income pilot project for 75 DC area hospitality workers who lost their jobs due to COVID-19. This program, Let's Go DMV, recently launched, and recognizing the power of narrative, is making the case for guaranteed income through a documentary film. And we get the first preview. So take a look and listen.
My name is Venorka Tucker. I am a banquet server and waiter. I work at the Ronald Reagan International Trade Center. I also work at the U.S. House of Representatives in their catering department. My family basically is a hospitality family. I've enjoyed it all of my life. Before the pandemic, we were able to pay bills. We were told we would be notified when we would be coming back. Having worked in places like this before where 9/11 happened and government shutdowns happened, and so we were used to some crazy things going on, but We never expected it to be any lengthy issue. It is now February of 2022. None of us are back to work full time. We get a job now and then. A job now and then won't pay the bills. It just won't. We know that unemployment is going to end, and we don't have any answer for that. We don't know how we're going to survive afterwards. So we got to figure out how to make some money so we can live. We realized we had to do this. This is what we have to do.
Let's Go DMV is a guaranteed income pilot project that will provide $1,000 of guaranteed income payments a month to 75 hospitality workers who lost their jobs or were underemployed because of COVID. The program will last 60 months or 5 years. And what we're doing is providing direct cash payments and then also building the power of workers and our table of partners to advocate for longer-term government-supported guaranteed income. The first year for the pilot, we've been able to raise $1 million through philanthropic gifts and grants. For years 2 through 5 of the pilot, we hope to finance that $1 million a year through an impact investment model. So we are sourcing impact investments that will benefit the region and advance racial equity in the region, probably things like affordable housing or Black and Brown enterprise development that foundations can invest in. And what we'll ask them to do is to donate or surrender the interest that they earn on that investment and contribute it to our Let's Go DMV Guaranteed Income Fund that we'd set up to pay out that $1 million of guaranteed income a year. It's our way of demonstrating to philanthropy, to government, that we can afford guaranteed income payments and we can use existing markets and impact investments, right, that are aligned with our mission to generate the revenue needed for guaranteed income payments.
A lot of people have to know when you speak up, you will be able to achieve things, even though it's not going to happen right away. The more people we have, the more powerful we become, you understand? When you empower each individual, you have a successful mission. You know, when everybody's responsible, things will be done. We've been active for the past 2 years.
We are power, we are strong. Who are we? We're Rodney C.
I view this pilot as one of many ways that we can continue to shore up people's lives and their ability to, to thrive, to make it in this region by putting money in their hands directly. What we're talking about is economic justice.
The workers, y'all are the most important part of this project. My cup is overflowing right now with joy because we've been wanting to be in this space. I have a big hope at the end of this 5 years, we will have been through so much together. We will have struggled together. We will have fought each other along the way. We will have loved each other, taken care of each other, and we will have overcome so many obstacles that the world said was impossible. At the end of the 5 years, the rest of our region and frankly the rest of the country will say there are 75 people in the greater Washington region who with their friends have finally figured out how to bring folks together across lines of difference, race, class, gender, language, places they live, and they create the kind of community that this country said it's supposed to be. And that at the end of the 5 years, we will be so bad, we will be so impactful, we'll be so connected, we'll all look at each other and say, what's next? Yeah! What's next?
That ending gets me every time. So excited. Hi, everyone. I'm Han Lee, and I'm the VP of Strategic Partnerships for IF, a Foundation for Radical Possibility. Our table of partners chose the name Let's Go DMV, short for Let's Guarantee Opportunity DMV, because we believe that a guaranteed income can create the space needed for workers to rest, to dream, and to build their individual and collective power. And that this power will fuel the narrative, culture, policy, and systems change needed to build a solidarity economy that pours into those that have been most oppressed by racial and gender capitalism. So we love talking to others about what we are doing around GI. Loved hearing about what everyone's doing on this webinar today. So to learn more about Let's Go and DNV and share what you're doing, or to make a grant or donation to Let's Go DNV, or to discuss the impact investment model that we're developing, please check out our website at letsgodnv.org or reach out to me directly at han@iffdn.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Han, and thank you so much to everyone for this rich and vibrant conversation that we've had today. We have had stories from the front lines, insight from powerful leaders in this fight to organize workers and to establish a guaranteed income in America. Thank you to Dorian Warren for his excellent moderation. I was really struck by the levels of the conversation that we just had. You know, Richard Wallace, investing in people, making the case for investing in people and what it will mean in people's lives, the individual. But then if you look at Pete DeMay's analysis around what it would mean in the workplace and stories from fast food restaurants across the country where organizing is starting to happen, coupled with Audra Wilson's analysis on the structural shift that would happen in the economy with the tax code if we established a guaranteed income, from the individual to the structural. We covered a lot of turf today. I want to thank you for being here. Flag Coworker Solidarity Fund for anyone who is wanting to organize in their workplace, or folks that you know who need cash to make the work happen. And also flag that on May 18th, we'll be doing a webinar on philanthropy and guaranteed income. The details are in the chat. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's stay in touch. Let's establish a guaranteed income. Let's organize more workers and make this economy work for us all. Thank you.